Hello, this is the second video that I'm doing talking about the Hebrew Scriptures versus religious experience. And I want to show you that the basis for Christianity always seems to favour religious experience over the Hebrew Scriptures. And I'll demonstrate it and start at the very beginning with St. Paul. St. Paul, previously known as Saul, was, by his own admission, an Orthodox Jew, a Pharisee who knew his scriptures, he knew his religion. He knew from the Hebrew Scriptures that Jesus was not the promised Messiah. He also knew from the Hebrew Scriptures, in common with the other Pharisees, that some of the things that Jesus was saying were very, very disturbing and had no place in Judaism. Particularly those famous words, "I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father but by me." Now, in Judaism, as everybody knows, you have direct access to God. So this is a man with a very inflated ego, which is very evident from many of the things that he's saying, grandiose, and St. Paul doesn't believe it, and his faith is firmly based on the Hebrew Scriptures in common with the Pharisees. Right? So he's probably talked to the early believers, remember, in Jesus, Jewish people. He will have had conversations with them. He would probably try to reason with them. So he will understand exactly where they're coming from. Now, he chose to persecute them. That was wrong. That was wrong, obviously. It goes without saying. And, of course, we do know from the New Testament that the religious authorities did say, don't persecute these believers in Jesus. Leave them alone, Leave them alone. Don't persecute them. Don't harm them. Nothing. But he persecutes them, and he has a religious experience on the road to Damascus. This is a solitary experience. He's blinded by a bright light. Gosh, you hear a lot about bright lights in spiritual experiences. Bright lights. The bright light blinds him, literally. But it's not uncommon for people to become blind and deaf through trauma, through a traumatic experience. It happens. I read the other day about a man who was unable to speak for quite a number of years because of a shock. And he now can speak. But I digress. So he has this spiritual experience, solitary experience. You have to bear in mind that when God spoke to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, at how many millions of people were present? I don't know, they'd sort of say 5 million people. Everybody heard that voice of God. Did you hear him? Did you hear him? Did you hear him? You heard. Everybody heard him. Can you imagine it? 5 million people, everybody's hearing it. Whereas Paul's experience, spiritual experience, was a solitary thing. It's his own spiritual experience. Based on this spiritual experience, he then has to go back to the Hebrew Scriptures and reevaluate everything and put it in sync with his religious experience. I cannot tell you how powerful religious experience can be. I've had them. Lots of other people have had them. They are very, I can say, overwhelming. It's convincing. It's like the truth. It's like it overrides everything, to the extent that you could have people believing from their spiritual experiences things that God has said don't believe. And I do understand the overwhelming, impressive impact of a spiritual experience. So he's having to go back to the Hebrew Scriptures and understand this experience. And what he's trying to do is take the Hebrew Scriptures and get it in sync with his religious experience. He's got to somehow pervert his religious beliefs so they're in sync with his religious experience. And that is the basis of Christianity, and that is how it's affected all his reasonings, his beliefs that he thinks now But because he's juggling around, he's got to find things in the Hebrew Scriptures to support this spiritual experience, to back it up. And I can't emphasize how strong these spiritual experiences. I had it, and it holds you bound in common with other people. You know, I believe God had made it clear to me that Jesus was Messiah, and I cannot tell you how what hold that spiritual experience held on me. I think, if I'm honest, really honest with you, that experience had more power and had more of a hold on me in believing in Jesus than the Hebrew Scriptures. In other words, if it was a toss-up between me being shown something in the Hebrew Scriptures that didn't add up, and I did see things over the years that didn't add up, but I was bound by this spiritual experience that had me locked, and it took supremacy over things that I was observing in the Hebrew Scriptures. It didn't make sense. You know, so many things. I studied theology. So many things I was questioning, investigating, trying to understand, and it didn't make sense. But I was so consumed, and it had such a stronghold in my life, this religious experience, that that's what kept me going, I think, if I'm really honest. For 42 years, that religious experience was a stronghold in my life. Now, and it was only when I relinquished the authority and the power of that spiritual experience in my life that I was able, because I was already in 98% in agreement, after extensive research of the Hebrew Scriptures again, after 42 years of believing it, listening, keeping an open mind, listening to the Jewish point of view regarding Jesus, the Messiah, the whole subject. I researched it. 98% of me agreed with every single word of the rabbis. Every single word of me, every single part of me, 98% believed in what Jews for Judaism were saying. Rabbi Michael Skobach, Rabbi Tovia Singer, Rabbi Stuart Federer. These are the people. They know not only the Hebrew Bible back to front, they know the New Testament back to front. I was listening to these people. I was listening to Chabad. I was listening to university professors. I was doing all my research, understanding it from a general view and understanding it from the Jewish perspective. I'd never done anything like this before. Not at the age of 18. I'd only heard the Christian side. I'd never been presented with the Jewish side. I didn't know it. My late father sent me to see our Orthodox rabbi, and the rabbi said nothing. Nothing. He did not challenge this belief. He did not try to educate me. Nothing. So I had this belief system, and there was no seed sown by a rabbi to get me thinking. But I digress a bit, and we're coming back to spiritual experience. So St. Paul has this, the basis of his faith is spiritual experience, and then he's got to explain it. He's got to put the Hebrew Scriptures in sync, in agreement with this experience. And I can understand him doing that, because he's wanting to explain it, to understand it. And we're going to move up to another person in the present times that you will have heard of, Professor Michael Brown. He is a Jewish man who has believed for the same length of time as I did that Jesus is the Messiah. And his faith, I would argue, by his own admission, is based fundamentally, and being a stronghold in his life in exactly the same way as it was with me, on spiritual experience. He was brought up in a Jewish home, I didn't get the impression it was particularly orthodox. He had the usual bar mitzvah. His father was a judge. He was very, very clever, his father. Very clever. But this is where common sense, he's not exercising. He's a clever man, his father, but he hasn't got the seichel to realise this. The professor's attending a church. He's 16 years of age. When you're 16, you think you're very grown up. I thought I was an adult. But in fact, officially, you are a child. You are a child. You are trying to work everything out. You are still a child. His father, despite being a clever man, a judge, allowed his son to be attending, his son at age 16, attending a church. And you get the impression that, the professor then, like 16-year-olds, you're going through different phases, you're mixed up, you're confused, you listen to that, you've got funny ideas. I don't know, you're just going through different phases because you're still developing. You're still developing, and you're still easily influenced by everything. And you're not an adult. The law doesn't regard you as an adult. You're not an adult. You're still trying to form everything. And it's the duty of Jewish parents to say, you're not going to church now. If you want to investigate this business about Jesus, you want to go to church, you'll have to wait till you're 18 or 21, and then you can do it. But while you're living in my home, this is a Jewish home, and I'm in complete agreement with what I'm saying, even as when I was a Jewish believer, this is what I believe. You do not go to church. I am your parent. You're being brought up Jewish. If you want to investigate Jesus, you do it when you're an adult, but you don't do it now. You are still a child. His father did not intervene, despite him knowing he attended church regularly, to stop him. He was just taking it as a lark by the professor's own admission. He just treated it like a joke. He's very light-hearted about it. The professor was impressed that some of these people in the church loved the Jews. Well, that's very nice. But he's going to church and he's listening to the Christian religion. He is seeing people take that cup of wine, which represents the blood of Jesus, and they taking the bread, which represents the body of Jesus. He's seeing this every week. He's hearing the Christian preachers, everything. So he decides, as a joke, he's a lark, he's a bit of a comedian with his, I'll go to the front. They have an altar call, and this is about making a definite commitment to follow Jesus Christ, to accept him as Lord of your life. So he thinks, I'll go forward. It's a bit of a laugh and a joke. He's not taking this seriously. I think it's all funny. You know what he can be like. Kids can be like at 16, have a lark, I got the impression he was perhaps with some other Jewish friends, he's like, go on, do it. Let's see what happens. They're just messing about. They're not just messing about. He has not been convinced that Jesus is the Messiah. Not at all. He hasn't looked at the Hebrew Scriptures. This is not a boy of 16 who's even he hasn't examined anything. He's just listening to the Christian presentation. So he goes up for a lark to that altar, and he has a spiritual experience. Overwhelming, powerful, convincing spiritual experience. The experience was a lot of it. What he was telling us was based on repentance. He was feeling a shit person. Christianity loves this. They want you to feel shit about yourself. You are such a rotten, vile, disgusting sinner. Right? That is the Christian. That's the message. You are foul and disgusting in God's sight. There's nothing you can do to please him. So he's having this very strong, powerful religious experience, and he wants to understand it. This is what he's telling the listeners. This is what he's telling later on as a middle-aged man. I want to understand this. So the way he understands it is to investigate Christianity. And that, in my view, is his downfall. He is trying to understand this religious experience from a Christian position. So he's starting now reading the New Testament. He's starting to look at the Hebrew Scriptures, but everything has to go in line with that spiritual experience because it is so dominant, it's so strong, like St. Paul. And he's having to try and explain it. And I understand this. But the problem was his father, who was a high court judge, didn't have the seichel and the Jewish parental responsibility to send this young professor at 16 to see the rabbi. What a responsible Jewish parent should have done, and I even believe this as a Jewish believer in Jesus. When I first heard this, his father is responsible for his upbringing. He's a child. He would send him to the rabbi and say, look, please can you help my son? And the responsible rabbi would take him on board and explain the Jewish religion, explain why he shouldn't believe in Jesus, explain what it's all about, what Christianity is all about, what the Jewish concept of the Messiah, what he should be believing as a Jew and what he shouldn't be believing as a Jew. You know, the whole thing. But his father, who was a High Court judge, didn't do that because the professor did not state that. I would have thought he would have stated, if that had happened, he would have stated that, but he didn't state that. His father thought it was funny, hallelujah. It's quite obvious from the professor, Michael Brown, that his father took it all as a joke. Hallelujah. So he's going, he could have been grounded, he should have been grounded. You're not going to that church. From now on, Sundays you stay in. That's what a responsible Jewish parent would do. Stay in, you're going to see the rabbi, blah, blah, blah. And he could have said, if you want to believe in Jesus and do all of that, you do it. You can do that when you're an adult. When you're 18, 21, however the age you consider an adult, whether it's 18 or 21. But while you're living in my home, a Jewish home, you do not go to church. That's what any responsible Jewish parent would do. And I'm not talking about people who are very religious. I'm talking about ordinary Jewish families that perhaps don't keep kosher. They don't go to shul every Shabbat. No. They might have the odd prayer, but they know the boundaries and they know the basic tenets of the faith. You worship only God. You don't bow down to idols. You don't believe that God takes flesh, that he does walkabouts. You don't believe in the whole Christian religion. So his father, despite being very clever, was irresponsible and did nothing to educate that 16-year-old son. Impressionable. You're so impressionable at 16. You're so impressionable. You're still forming yourself as an adult. So he got nothing from a rabbi to challenge his belief system. He's totally embroiled and looking at everything from the Christian point of view, the scriptures from the Christian point of view. He is still attending church and he's being fed the message over and over again. That is indoctrination. The whole purpose why the Christian wants you to go to church and to keep going to church. It's the most important thing on the planet. The rule for all evangelical Christians is church. Church. They have to keep you going in that church. They get very worried if somebody stops going to church because that is the way they keep you controlled and believing this belief system. It's by keeping you in that church and getting you involved in all the activities and getting you in there on a Sunday morning or evening or both. They have to keep you in that church. And that's what he was doing. He was listening and it was being reinforced, that Christian message. He's had this spiritual experience and everything has been solidified and made stronger. So this faith in Jesus is being strengthened. It's being made very, very strong. And there's nothing coming against it. His father, despite being a judge so clever, has not doing anything about it. So he's not even learning the Jewish position. And, at such a young age, he is impressed. He is no different to St. Paul in that his faith is based initially on a supernatural experience, exactly the same as St. Paul, exactly the same as me, in terms of that spiritual experience held such a stronghold for me. Yes, I thought Jesus was the Messiah from the Hebrew Scriptures, but I had my reservations about different things. But you see, the reservations, despite all the reservations, over 42 years I've been looking at things. But that spiritual experience was such a stronghold in my life. It kept me believing in this faith. And it was the same with Michael Brown. I'm sure. And you find this with people who've had spiritual experiences. It is so strong. It's all-consuming. It goes in every part of the brain and the kishkas and everything, that it can take dominance over the Hebrew Scriptures. And there has to become a point in your life is, who am I? Who is, Lord? Who is supreme? Who is dominating? Who is in control of my life? Is it a spiritual experience, or is it the authority of the Hebrew Scriptures? St. Paul, for him, it was a spiritual experience, and he was messing about with the Hebrew Scriptures, trying to switch and pervert things round and reading things that weren't there, to get in line with a spiritual experience. Exactly the same as Professor Michael Brown, investing the Christian faith, getting involved, still going to church, that experience that was so strong and had such an impact. He will have remembered every moment of that spiritual experience. And you do hear this quite a bit. So we have to say, who are we believing? Because I investigated after 42 years. I had no doubts that Jesus was the Messiah. There were loads of things in the Scriptures over the years I couldn't see. It didn't make sense. I would research things, certain prophecies, everything. It didn't make sense. I knew it. I did know it. There were things that didn't add up. But what kept me and was a stronghold in my life that had absolute, sovereign power over me was a spiritual experience. So even in my own little research as a Jewish believer in Jesus, during the 42 years, I could see things didn't add up. It didn't make sense, And it's only when I listened to Rabbi Tovia Singer that I realised he's talking about the very things I've investigated. He's come to the same conclusions as I did. I'm not a rabbi. But he came to the same conclusions as I did. He's a rabbi. Rabbi Michael Skobac, the same. In my research when I was at theological college and afterwards when I left, I was still doing the research, and I could see those things that didn't add up. But I still held on to this belief. I think I'm being honest here because of this religious experience. And I'm telling you this because possibly you're in the same position. And I understand it. Now, when I did my thorough research, which I've mentioned before, I was 98% convinced that I was wrong. And it was a terrible shock to me. I can't tell you how traumatic that was for me. It was really, really, I can't begin to tell you how traumatic it was. It's one of the most traumatic things in my life. To suddenly realise for 42 years there was no basis to this faith that I'd been believing in. But I couldn't put myself in 100%, and what was holding me back was this spiritual experience which had such a stronghold. And in the end, I remembered that something that Rabbi Tovia had said earlier on. I remember lying in bed and thinking about what he'd said, and he said, even if Jesus Christ appeared to me, I would not put my faith in him. I see the water turned into wine. I'm not going to put my faith in that, Jesus. And you know why? Because Rabbi Tovia Singer's faith is not based on apparitions and miraculous things, supernatural things happening. It's based on the Hebrew Scriptures, and I suddenly realised that is faith. That is faith. He's not moved by what he sees. Apparitions, different things happening. His faith is based solely on the Hebrew Scriptures, and boy did that impress me when I thought about it. Because you have to remember, God warns us not to get involved in things that are going on in the spiritual realm, and they are going on because God warns us not to have anything to do with it. When Moses threw down his staff in front of Pharaoh, it turned into a snake. Pharaoh's magicians threw down their staffs, and they also turned into the snakes. So in other words, the magicians could duplicate what Moses had done. The magicians could duplicate exactly what Moses had done. And the way that God showed Pharaoh that he was supreme over anything in the universe, any other magicians and whatnot, Moses' snake ate up the other snakes, the magician snakes, and that was shown to Pharaoh that the God of Israel was supreme over all of magic. He's supreme over any spiritual forces, any gods and things that people believe in. It's the God of Israel who reigns supreme. He reigns supreme. And there is nothing that's been created in this universe that has not been created by God. Everything in this universe, all the little things going on, spiritual powers, have been created by God, but God has said, have nothing to do with it. So this is about obedience, because God knows of all these powers in the universe and things going on. And he's saying, have nothing to do with it. The God of Israel has supremacy over everything in the spiritual realm, right? And this is what Pharaoh recognized from that incident. And thinking over this, I realized, who am I going to put myself in 100% agreement? Is it the Hebrew Scriptures? I've already decided from my extensive research over months and months and months and keeping an open mind that I'm 98% can see, I can understand that Jesus is not the Messiah, and I understand why. This is the most important thing. But that stronghold of that spiritual experience is stopping me. So I'm in the middle. And I thought I could stay like that indefinitely. I believe everything the rabbis have said, 98%, but I'm still going to believe in Jesus as the Messiah. Well, it's crazy. And maybe something in the human spirit doesn't allow that. Something's got to give. And I decided to relinquish the spiritual experience. I decided to say, no, I reject this spiritual experience. I don't understand it. I don't understand what was going on. I haven't got a clue. And I took the decision, forget it. I don't understand it. It's very weird. It's very strange. It was very convincing. But I have made the decision with my mind to reject it and to go with the Hebrew Scriptures, which I am already in agreement with 98%. It's this 2%. And it was this stronghold of the spiritual experience that was keeping me from putting myself in 100% in agreement with the Scriptures. I was already in 98%. But I'm telling you this because I want to help you understand the power and strength of spiritual experiences. And we have to ask ourselves, are we, as Jews, being moved around with the wind by this and that spiritual experience and allowing it to dominate us and to control us and to get us to believe things that are contrary to the very things that God has revealed in the Hebrew Scriptures? Right? You have to make your mind up. Are you sticking with this spiritual experience and having it as the supreme dominance in your life, as your belief system? I believe in Jesus because I've had this spiritual experience. Or is it based on a proper understanding of the Hebrew Scriptures and looking at the Hebrew Scriptures from your own people, from your own rabbis? I was never presented over 42 years with the Jewish position of why I shouldn't believe in Jesus, what it was all about with the Messiah. I didn't know. I didn't know any of it. I hadn't heard it. And you have to remember, when I came to faith, there was no internet. There was no internet. There was no internet. There was nothing coming anywhere. The Jewish people who didn't believe in Jesus that I knew did not sow any seeds to challenge that belief system. But I have to go back to the original point. That spiritual experience had such a strong hold on me that I was even too willing to believe it, even though it was obvious with this that it was contrary to the Hebrew Scriptures. It was contrary to the Hebrew Scriptures. I hope this video has been interesting, has been thought-provoking, that gets you thinking, that gets you questioning. And it's a case of being very, very honest with yourself. Particularly Jewish believers in Jesus, you have to really, really be honest with yourself. You have to really, really be honest with yourself. And you have to ask yourself, have I listened to the rabbis? What is this really true? What am I basing my faith on? And is it correct? And can I not open myself up and listen to rabbis like on Jews for Judaism, Rabbi Tovia Singer? Open up your mind. Listen to the rabbis.